Welcome to Real Talk with Reginald D. I'm your host, Reginald D. On today's podcast, I have Carolyn Deck, a New Zealand native and an author of Above the Turbulence, Your Ticket Out of Pain and Purpose, and the co-author of Christian Marriage, Devotionals from Both Perspectives. Welcome to the show, Carolyn.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. I'm excited to have this conversation.
I am too, and I thank you so much for reaching out to me on my website and wanting to be on the show. I was so excited about that.
Yeah, God just guides and directs us and opens doors, and we just have to say yes and keep walking.
Exactly. So, Carolyn, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, and your journey to becoming an author?
Okay, sure. Yes, as you said, I'm from New Zealand. I'm a daughter of two. I had a big sister. Well, I have a big sister rather. And things were great, and then they weren't. And then things got a little turbulent and then broke down, sadly. When two people come together and get married, they're not two perfect people, right? So the harmony at times, unless you really focus on it and are committed to that, can quickly unravel. And so I just want to shout out to that note to people who are listening that are in relationship, married or otherwise, that just remember no one's perfect. And just have this posture of good listening and kindness, I guess. So yes, so sadly my family unraveled, and then this theme started in my life where I was on the move. Firstly, it was when I was about 16. I moved out of my family home after my father had moved out, actually. My mother was an alcoholic and struggling with herself. And so my sister put her hand up one day at a family meeting and said, we'll have her. So interestingly, just so much I learned from that. And I just embraced that all, just recently, and I'm going to chop and change all over the place. I hope you keep up. But I was in Africa recently and I met this young man, and it says, your past doesn't define you. And so I don't know if it was this really strong conscious thought or what it was actually, but I was given this opportunity to relocate. It was hard. I walked away from schools and friendships and so on, but I also walked away from that dysfunction, which was a good thing, but it did leave me grieving because it wasn't, my family wasn't a family any longer. So anyways, I had a year there. I then came back to Wellington in New Zealand where I grew up and lived with my dad for 6 months. And that's right, when I was at my new school, I applied for American Field Scholarship. And I don't even know why I thought I would succeed in that, because I was pretty bad at school, to be honest. But I'm a jovial person. I was athletic, and I just went, you know what? I'm going for it. We'll see what happens. And I ended up in Kansas, of all places, little old Winfield, Kansas. And it was funny, I couldn't even find it on the map. So that was kind of funny. And so there started my international, global sort of theme of life. I had a year there with the most incredible family. They taught me what love looked like, what it sounded like, and love in action. It was such a blessing and so rich. And we're still really great friends today. So as my book would suggest, I'll just show you here. It's called Above the Turbulence, Your Ticket Out of Pain to Purpose. I have seen quite a bit of experience of turbulence, not only in aircraft being thrown around, but in my life, in choice making, in the receiving end of other people's choices, pretty turbulent. But the good Lord showed me that I can actually fly above. And with him, when I get up there, the perspective is very different. And he healed me in the making of this book. It took 6 years. Did I want to write a book? Was it on my heart? Absolutely not. I wasn't Mary and go, yeah, here I am, pick me. I'm like, silly idea. No, like, you got the wrong sister. And he's going, oh, really? well, I don't think so. I want you because you have no idea what you're doing. And I'm like, yeah, well, you're right on that point. And so, yeah, a wild ride and it's still going and it's still awesome and it's still scary and it's still, but yeah, it's great. Yeah.
So you talk about turbulence, and I think about turbulence. Just because you're in a turbulence, I've been in planes before and things like that. It got rough, but still doesn't mean you're going to crash.
Funny you should say that. So you won't believe this. My youngest son, he is now a pilot and flies for American. And he goes, you know what, Mum? Planes never crash in turbulence. That's not what causes them to crash. You're fine. And I'm like, interesting. And then I thought about planes and faith, right? People go, oh, I don't believe in that stuff. I don't have that faith. Well, think about all your things that you do have to experience to have faith. Like I get an elevator every day. Hmm. I mean, that could drop 44 floors. And yeah, I cross the street. I get in a plane. I've never seen the pilot before. All these things. So I love to tease that out a bit when people say they don't have faith. Okay, interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you've been married for 34 years and raised 5 children, which is a huge accomplishment. I mean, sadly to say that people are not together that long anymore like they used to be,
Mm,
for whatever reason.
sadly.
But
Yeah.
how did your personal experience with family and marriage influence your approach of overcoming the trials that you went through and what you would go through with having, a
Mm,
marriage and kids and traveling and doing it all at one time?
sure. Good question. Rick Warren is somebody I follow, Daily Hope. And he said something this week, which I found quite profound. And we were talking about this before we came on, and it's intimacy. Into me, I see. And he threw a lot of what I hear. So I choose very intentionally what I listen to, who I listen to. And I have a chapter on that actually. My book is written as a travel agent. And it's like you've come to my office and I have you sit down and we talk about a few things about, the beginning of where you think you're going, how to travel, the perils of travel, etc. And one of them is on the tips of prepare for the journey. And you need to travel light, which is an analogy of heavy luggage you're dragging around the place. It's not easy. Well, I liken that to the emotional baggage and weight you carry around. And another one I talk about is the noise cancelling headphones, this monologue in your head. And so Rick Warren talks about your shape. And I feel so blessed that I was able to understand what that looked like. So for Christians, S is for your spiritual gifting that is given to you specifically. H is your heart. A is your ability. P is your personality. And E is your experience. And I have been shaped by the past, by the dysfunction of my family and the pain of that. But I made a very intentional choice that I'm going to learn from that. I'm going to understand what marriage looks like, define marriage, and it's not what the world tells you today. So when you have something created, it usually comes with a handbook, right? Like the vacuum cleaner still comes with a handbook, your Apple phone, well, your AirPods, everything comes with a little manual. And I've been blessed, I feel, but I made the intentional choice. I'm going to study that handbook of life, basic instruction before leaving Earth, which is called the Bible. And God defines very clearly what it looks like. And as you said, I co-authored in that Christian marriage devotional on both sides, from both perspectives. And I got a clear, solid, truthful understanding of what marriage looked like. And so I grew up in a childhood where I saw what it wasn't intended to look like and how that unravels. And I sat on the fence post and watched other family members' marriage unravel. And I knew very clearly I didn't want that. So, what was I prepared to do to ensure that wasn't going to happen for me? And yeah, it takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of intimacy, checking in, right? Into me, I see. And so Rick Warren also says, I quote him all day long, but he goes, you got to do a checkup from the neck up. You've got stinking thinking up there, right? You got to take the garbage out. And so a lot of the breakdown in marriage and in relationship, it's always #me. It's what I want. And that's not what God said about marriage and why he created marriage. And, people don't like what it says that he had Adam and he identified that, Adam isn't meant to be alone, so I'm going to give him a helper. Well, instantly, if you don't understand that term, it's considered a helper. What? What do you mean? Like a maidservant or something? Like women arc up about that. But here's the thing. We don't know what we don't know until we know, right?
Right.
And the word helper, and I guess it's the Hebrew, or was it the Greek? I'm not quite sure. But that word helper is the helper that Jesus said, I have to leave you so that then when I'm gone and ascended to be with my Father, I can give you your helper. Wow. To me, when I heard that, I'm like, wow, that's the Holy Spirit he gives to me. He's not subservient to God or Jesus, right? They had this beautiful unity. And I looked at myself like that. I'm like, that's the helper I'm going to be in my marriage. This is what I need to work towards. This is the marriage I want. It's being intentional and it's being honest. It's being honest when I was on a momentum, I love it, for mums, this podcast the other week. And I'll say, come on, girls, let's be real. Like, you get all cranky, and I get it. Like, you've had kids all day and you're trying to do dinner and now it's spoon, and then your husband comes in with phone stuck to his ear and now you're frustrated, and then, and it just unravels fast. It's tough, right?
Yeah.
And it's tough. And I get it. My husband traveled so much and I had these 5 kids on my own a lot of time, not all the time. But then I started reframing my thinking. So instead of stinky thinking, I reversed it to have an attitude of gratitude. And that just changed everything. Like, wow. And I have a chapter about that too, actually. It's called Flight Diverted. And I had the stinky thinking because I'm like, great, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to write. It's all about me. It's my day. And I look around and the floor's filthy, the beds aren't made, they're dishes. And I'm like, ugh. I'm like, ugh. There it goes again. The maid has to do all this. And then I plugged in some music. I washed that, like gospel music. And it just changed my thinking and my attitude. And I just burst into tears. I'm like, wow, I am so grateful I have a husband. I'm so grateful I have somewhere to live. I'm so grateful I have a washing machine and there's plumbing. you know, I'm so grateful. And then when I kept through that list of what I was grateful for, it just changed everything up. And then on this podcast last week, it's like, come on, girls, don't you want your castle to be beautiful? Don't you want your men coming home to go, oh, this is great, I'm home. I want to be home. And when you reverse it and you change some of this thinking and reframe, well, what do you want? And what can I do? Because you can only control yourself, really. I mean, you like to think you can control your partner, but after a while, that doesn't work. So what power have I got to give me what I want? And I talk about that a lot, and it's the power of choice.
Exactly. Yeah, you got to look at everything in different perspectives. I told some guys one time, I said, my wife is the head of my household. They looked at me like I was crazy because it's like we all grew up, people telling you that the man is the head of the household, right? No, I said, she does things that allows me to go outside of that door, provide and do all the things I do. And any decision making around the house got to do with the kids, grandkids, all that kind of stuff. She does it. I mean, she makes the decisions, and because she makes good decisions, you know what I'm saying? I get in there. If I know I'm tired and I'll mess it up, oh, hey, just do it, baby. I'm good with it. So
Right,
it's
right,
one of
right.
those things. You don't have to be so-called boss in the house or things like that. It's just what works. It's called a help meet, not a helpmate. So you got to help me,
Right, right, right.
and the
Think
family.
if you have the servant attitude, not to be the maid servant, but to give. Like you think that when you were dating, right? And here's this hot woman or gorgeous guy, and you're like, wow, and for us, we may cook beautiful meals, or I don't know, whatever you did, you just gave because you love them so much, and you're like, wow, this is great, and you ring them, and you know, you just you give them the world. Well, then you get married and it all goes out the door. It's like, no, 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 no. You need to keep focus on what was it? And do you want that? Do you want to keep that? Well, you've got to keep working at that. And so it's not out of a place of servanthood, but it's out of love. You do it because really ultimately, if you want this intimacy, into me I see, and intimacy, which is not a physical thing. We're not talking about sex here. We're talking about intimacy. If you want that level of depth and love and appreciation and connection and being heard, this is where we need to go. And honesty, we got to be honest with ourselves. I'd say to the girls, come on, really, are you really being realistic? Are you being fair? I mean, with this expectation or that? The poor guy doesn't even know and you're blowing him up. Like, you can't read your mind, these sorts of things. So, we just got to do a checkup from the neck up, be honest, go deep in ourselves, and just be real, I think, is helpful. And be careful what you listen to, who you listen to. It shapes you, right? And it can define you. If you continue doing something, I heard the other day, this was great. If you make this your routine, that's who you become. But it's not necessarily who you are. It's just who you've become,
Exactly.
right? So you can
Right.
chop some of that out and come back to who you are and who you are, like you said on your podcast last week. Know who you are meant to be, who God created you to be. It's awesome.
Yeah, that's the main thing. That's one of the main things that you got to know what you're meant to be so you can become who you are meant to be when it's all said and
Right.
done.
Yeah. And that's that intimacy bit, right?
Right.
I think. Yeah.
Right.
And don't be afraid. It's okay. Let's not ignore our past. It's part of the fabric of who we are. But let's use that to actually fuel us to go forward. I love that. And then I happened to be in France, and Da Vinci said exactly the same thing, but in a very poetic way. And he encourages us to go into those dark chasms of our hearts and our minds and illuminate those dark spaces. And just maybe, if you're brave enough to go there, you'll find life and the key to life. And it was like, this is good. This is good.
Yes, it's profound. Now in your book, you also talked about shifting from surviving to thriving. For someone
Right.
who feels stuck in a cycle of pain, what are the first steps that they can make to break free and begin thriving in their life? And I think that's very critical with people. They
Absolutely.
going through things day in and day out, and they
Sure.
you know, just striving and striving and striving and never thriving. And then that kills your motivation when it comes to life, when you're in that
Yeah.
mindset. So what would you say to someone
Right.
how they break free?
Okay. Right. I've got a number of tools that are pretty easy to do, really. The first thing I think, like this young girl said, first thing I believe is we need to stop. Just stop. Okay. Stop everything. Stop the noise, right? This monologue going on in your head. Stop what you're listening to and what you're watching. And it could even be disassociate for a moment from those around you, the distraction, right? And stop. And then, if you have faith, it's a game changer. Just It's just a game changer, right? I'd encourage you to stop and just cry out. He wants to hear from you. He wants to help. He wants to show you who you are. He wants to tell you the truth. And in this basic instruction before leaving Earth, even here's the thing, you could just go on AI, ChatGPT, and just put in, ask for 5 or 10 points of how God sees you. How does God see you? Because what I experienced and grew up with, and I'm talking to a lot of people, is we're still believing the lies, right? And that keeps us stuck. We can't turn that off. And there doesn't seem to be fuel in the tank, let's say, to move forward. And so I think to change the rhetoric, okay, think of believe. How do you spell believe? B-E, capital L, capital I, B-E. Big fat lie hidden in what you believe. So when you stop, you can cry out to God. You can ask for his help. I would get out a piece of paper and a pen and write down the things you believe. What you believe about yourself, what you believe about the past, whatever it is that's like really stopping you, where you're stuck. Write it down and then read it out. So that way you can hear yourself. Okay, we talk to ourselves all the time, but when you hear it out loud, you go, really? Well, that's ridiculous. And you can put a line through it, right? Actually, bing bong, that actually isn't true. And if you don't know whether it's true or not, like I say, see what God says about you. Because for me, I grew up believing the lie of who I was, this kid that will never go anywhere, get anywhere, will never have an intimate family relationship or a marriage that will stick. And when you start telling yourself that, you believe it. Well, that's not true. So we need to establish what is true. Don't be too afraid to go into these intimate places of your heart and soul, like Da Vinci said, and shine some light in there to those painful places. And then you start to cross out what isn't true. You can affirm what is true. You can understand some of the why, but the why doesn't get you unstuck. What you need to ask next is what. That to me is the power of getting unstuck. When you ask a what question, it's like I was saying, we just said before, and I've got on the back, knowing we have choices changes everything. Understanding the power of our response is key. Now, I know when you're stuck, you feel like you have no power, but I'm here to tell you, you do. When you ask, what do I want? That was the question Jesus asked more than anything to anybody. If you search in the Bible, all the questions that people ask him, he usually replies with a question. And the most often asked question of Jesus was back to that person, what do you want? It wasn't like he needed to know, because he already knew. They needed to know.
Right.
So maybe you need to find out what your what is. What do you want? What steps are you prepared to take? What little baby step are you prepared to take today? What do you need to fill your mind with? Take out the garbage, but then you've got this void. So now you've got to fill it with something. Be very careful with what you're filling it with, right? So the what am I going to listen to? And what do I want? Just write down some of these what questions. And I believe from my experience as well, that actually pumps the tires, because right now they're flat, aren't they? When you sit in the space of being a victim, you're not going anywhere. You're stuck. Your tires are flat. So the way to pump your tires up is start asking some of these other questions.
That's good. I really like that. I really like that because like I said, we're joint heirs with Christ. And like I say, he always asks the question, what do you want? You know, and think about it with joint heirs. That means we have to work together. He already knows what he has for you. He already knows the purpose he has for you. You just got to align with it and,
That's right.
and go with it if you want
Yeah,
what life really has for you.
sure. And it could be a good thing to have that conversation back and forth with him and say, well, I don't know what I want. So you could say, okay, God, what is it you want for me? Right?
Exactly. Now, Carolyn, with your book, all your proceeds from your book went towards helping orphans and widows in Uganda through faceswithnames.org. What inspired you to connect your book success with this cause?
Oh, oh
And
my
how has
God.
it empowered you?
This is the exceedingly abundant bit, I'll tell you. Okay. When I was about 10 years old, I would get small amounts of money as gifts for my birthday. And I would go down to the bookstore, and I don't know why, I just loved Africa. And I would buy a little book, come home, and I would sketch the elephant and the giraffe. And I just had this seed planted here of this love for Africa. In my 20s, I'm now a travel agent. I'm in the Serengeti. Serengeti is middle of Africa, right? It's in
Right.
Kenya. And it's like the savannah. And I'm like, oh, there's an elephant, there's a lion. Oh my gosh, like, wow, this is like, wow, I mean, like decades on, this love that was planted here. And then at night, we'd have to go and collect sticks, right, for the fire at night, because we're wild camping, literally wild camping, because wild, yeah. And out of nowhere, these little faces came, and they'd be skipping with joy and their eyes, and they'd be dancing. And I'm like, who are you? Like, hello, where did you come from? And I realized I was in their home. I wasn't in no man's land. I was actually in their home. And growing up with an alcoholic mother, I knew what it looked like when you looked in someone's eyes and there's nothing, like it's empty. I tell you, these kids had this life beaming out of their eyes. I'm like, wow, such joy. And I always remembered that, right? And I'm just like, wow. Well, a couple of years later, I find myself back there, and I actually get engaged in South Africa. And I'm like, my love of Africa. Well, then decades on, I now have a daughter. She's 18, and she goes on a mission trip to help orphan kids in Malawi. And she comes home and hear these photos of these little kids, right? And they're looking at her hands and then turning it over and going, this is weird. We look the same that way, but we look different. And then, I mean, the engagement was precious. And I thought, wow, there are these faces again. And I just knew, I'm like, right, all proceeds of this are going to your foundation.
That's awesome. I really love that. You're so amazing. But you know what? God just gives you a glimpse of what your purpose and your destiny is
Yeah,
before you actually accomplish it. Because you saw a
absolutely.
glimpse of it in your early 20s.
Yeah,
And
I
then,
had no idea.
Caroline, how can people purchase your books and follow your journey and find you on social media?
Sure. So Amazon. So you can type in my name, even just do a Google search, Carolyn Deck, Deck, and it comes up with podcasts. But you could say Carolyn Deck author if you don't recall the name. But I think in the show notes, there's a link, I believe, to that. There will be a link to Faces with Names. So knowing that your choice to help yourself, God has such a bigger vision, and he wants you to then not just grow you, but, a bigger view for other people as well. And so these kids in Uganda, you'll be supporting them. You can find me on Facebook, Carolyn Deck, or Instagram, Carolyn.Deck. And I'm working on a website, but not yet finished.
Okay. Well, there you have it, everybody. Carolyn Deck. Carolyn, it has been an amazing experience today. This has
Oh,
been an experience for me. And I really appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to stop by and speak real truth to my listeners and to me also.
and you too, to me. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
You're so welcome. Absolutely. Thank you for tuning in with Real Talk with Reginald D. If you enjoy listening to Real Talk with Reginald D, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. See you next time.